morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where first off, I'm proud to announce the winners of those 3 Blu-rays of American Sniper from our friends at Dolby Atmos. Again, that sound technology was used to mix the film, which features no musical score. So that makes the sound mix of War all the more important and more in the forefront of the movie-going experience. So I have a really nice group of winners here that I feel kind of cover this movie from every angle. So third place goes to Stephen Escareno, who I think did a good job of addressing some of the controversy of the film while still being respectful. I talked about not, dogpiling on the hate bandwagon for American Sniper when I announced this contest. And some of you were like, why can't we say anything we want about the movie? And I was like, you can, but I think that you should be somewhat respectful of Chris Kyle's sacrifice for his country and all that he did for his fellow soldiers, even if you don't agree with him or what he stands for in some regard. But so Stephen Escareno got it just right. And he said, at Grace Randolph, American Sniper is a movie that tries to portray Chris Kyle as a saint, emphasis on tries, I guess, as it plays on your patriotic sentiments. Hashtag Dolby Atmos. So very, very, I think respectful and polite way of pointing out some of the flaws that some perceive with that film. So great job, Stephen, and you're getting a copy of the movie. I hope you're excited to either watch it for the first time or see it again. By the way, if I announced your name here, check your Twitter account because I have a direct message because I've sent you information on how to get your Blu-ray copy. Then second place, I think also talked a little bit about how the film was received, and this was Alpha Odrago, sorry, aka Alpha Mustang, that's the Twitter handle. But Alpha says, at Grace Randolph, hashtag Dolby Atmos, like Chris Kyle, this movie is a silent and unapologetic record breaker that hits its specific target audience. Great way to describe the movie, because it made a ton of money at the box office. And actually, I was just recently, reading an article, I believe in the Hollywood Reporter, and it touched on salaries in Hollywood right now, and talked about how Bradley Cooper took very little money up front for American Sniper, but because he got back-end points and the movie did so well at the box office, he made a lot of money off of that film. So, as that studio executive said, I actually believe it might have been the Warner Brothers executive, Greg Silverman, that was recently interviewed about the Warner Brothers slate, but he said it's great to see actors betting on themselves. And I agree. I think that's the best way to go for all parties involved. So congratulations, Alpha. Great one-sentence review. And then the winner, I thought this was very touching, and I really think it deserves to be the #1 one-sentence review. And this is from frequent BTT viewer Christina Price. And Christina says, at Grace Randolph, American Sniper touched me personally by helping me understand the sacrifices my dad made during his tour. Hashtag Dolby Atmos, hashtag proud. Fantastic one-sentence review, Christina. Again, I think those 3 one-sentence reviews really cover the film very well from all the different perspectives and it was viewed from a lot of different perspectives when it came out. So congratulations to the 3 of you. I hope you enjoy your Blu-rays, and again, check your Twitter direct messages for a message from me. Alright, so let's move on to today's stories. We have some very interesting ones at play here today, and the first one's a really funny one. Now this is Sam Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson made a lot of headlines yesterday when he confirmed that he is not in Captain America 3 Civil War. But my favorite part about the story was that his quote ended with, yeah, I'm not in Captain America 3 Civil War, and I can't figure that out. Like, he was insulted that he wasn't in Civil War. Like, he's gotten used to being in all the Marvel movies, perhaps taking it a little for granted. I mean, it's a pretty sweet deal. Actually, I remember a friend of mine pointed out that in Captain America Winter Soldier, he had actually managed to have an action sequence where he got to sit down for the entire action sequence, that car chase, fantastic car chase. Really loved it, thrilling. But I thought that was a really funny thing to point out. And he only has to film for a few days for these movies, but then he gets to go on the press tour and go on the red carpet. It's like a free trip around the world. I don't know if they took him to all the events for this last film, Avengers Age of Ultron, because his scenes were so few, but still, it's a pretty sweet gig. But he has confirmed, he signed a 9-picture deal initially, and he's done 7 so far. So there's only 2 left. So I guess Marvel is becoming a little bit more stingy in how they use him. Or I guess, if you want to be polite about it, careful. But I think the fact that they are being careful about how they use him means that perhaps they don't plan to renew his contract. Samuel L. Jackson in the same story is discussing wanting to renew his contract and, re-up for the whole, the next phase 3, 4, and beyond. But I think it points to an interesting question, and that's as the Marvel Cinematic Universe moves more towards the stars with so many cosmic films. Not only do you have the Guardians of the Galaxy sequel coming up, which doesn't involve his character, but you have Infinity War, Captain Marvel, and Humans. Maybe you don't need Sam Jackson, and maybe we're going to see a transition over to SWORD. SWORD. It's so my pronunciation. It's words you so rarely say out loud. But anyway, there's SHIELD for the Earth, and there's SWORD for space. And they have like a cool JLA Watchtower kind of space station. They operate out of Joss Whedon, I believe. I'm not sure if he invented it or just kind of brought it back into popular discussion, but he did a lot with SWORD. And then, of course, the character of Abigail Brand. Really cool. It's like the space version of Nick Fury. She has green hair like Polaris, and she wears all green, and she's a really tough-talking person. So she might be putting SHIELD out of business. And you would think that maybe Joss Whedon would have jumped at the chance to introduce her with Avengers Age of Ultron, maybe in like a good after-credit sequence, maybe, perhaps, instead of the throwaway one that they had. But that would have been a great after-credit sequence, actually, and that would have been a much better way to tease the Infinity Gauntlet and all the space movies that are coming up with the introduction of SWORD, just in their space station, being like, we have a blip or something on our radar, and casting Abigail Brand, who will be, by the way, a cheap hire, because, if you're going to renew with Sam Jackson, he's so ingrained in the movies at this point, he could probably demand a little bit more money. But a new character, you can cast someone who's not particularly well known, say, hey, you get to be in the Avengers movies, you get to save a pretty penny. Also, I think that Sam Jackson is a bit of a test case for the other actors in the MCU as to how Marvel plans to handle it when their contracts run out. Robert Downey Jr. made out like a bandit, got a ton of money, but we'll see how everybody else fares. All right, so that's the first story of the day. I'm curious how you feel about that. Would you feel bad if you didn't see Samuel L. Jackson in the Marvel movies anymore? I mean, Phil Coulson left, right? Poor Clark Gregg got stuck with a TV gig that hasn't really done anything for him, and the movies survived. So I would be very nervous if I were Samuel L. Jackson right now, and it sounds like he is a little bit, or at least offended. All right, next up, there's another story that made headlines yesterday that was very interesting, and that's another project from Disney, which is going to bring one of their animated projects to the big screen in a live-action movie. But it's from an unlikely source, and this is Fantasia. Yes, it was announced they're going to take the Night on Bald Mountain sequence, the infamous one that when you were a kid and you watched Fantasia, you were like, let's fast forward this one. I love Fantasia. It makes a great thing to watch when you're going to sleep. It's really beautiful. But it's the giant winged demon who stands on top of Bald Mountain and raises the dead. They've incorporated it in some of their parades. If you've been to Disney World in the past few years, it's part of their evening spectral magic parade. Very, very, very somewhat pretty well-known sequence from Fantasia, even though that's a pretty old movie, and I think overall not that familiar with today's audiences. Now, this sounds like a pretty good idea to me. They've only hired the screenwriter so far. They haven't attached anybody else to it. No idea of what the plot's going to be. And also, I think that they're probably thinking shades of Pirates of the Caribbean, right? They're like, oh, it's going to be like dark and scary, and that can maybe bring in more of an adult audience. So I can see them wanting to do it. But I do think it's interesting that as they continue to mine 2D animation for these live-action ideas, they aren't feeding the beast, right? They aren't, feeding the idea generator, because they aren't really making any more 2D animated movies. And I just think that's a really odd choice, especially after we just saw that short that they made for Tomorrowland, which was in 2D animation, which is quite well done. So it's like, you have the skills, and this is creating properties that are very useful to you in the live-action domain. Can't you at least just make them cheaper? Just try it out. See what people. I would just take a stab at it. Take a stab in the dark. You have so much money, Disney. You can afford to fund a passion project, which should be your passion, but is definitely the passion of your very large and vocal fan base. And then the other thing I want to say about this, besides the irony of stripping 2D animation without replenishing it, is that I hope that this movie has the same artistry as Fantasia. Fantasia was one of Disney's most ambitious projects. Walt Disney, the person, when he was starting out, he made it actually very early on in his career. They made a Fantasia 2000, as you might recall, which I do not think was as good. But Fantasia really, you know, not only was it so well made, but its goal to introduce these beautiful orchestrations to the masses was, I think, very admirable. So I hope that Night on Bald Mountain, for instance, has a wonderful soundtrack of classical music, you know, these really famous pieces, instead of, you know, just the latest Hollywood score. So I hope that it remembers its history and pays homage to that. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is a Michael Bay story. Now, just yesterday we talked about James Wan really, you know, rooting himself at Warner Brothers, and it looks like Michael Bay continues to be a Paramount guy. And why not? They make not only the Transformers films, for which he not only does very well for them, but I'm sure he gets paid very well. But in addition to allowing him to do Pain and Gain, which the studio distributed, Paramount, which I liked. I know a lot of people did not, but I thought it was a very well-made film that talked about you know, the get-rich-quick culture of America these days. I thought it was a really good movie. Maybe in poor taste in some areas, as I understand. That was a big chief complaint from a lot of people, but I did think it was a good movie. And I think it reminded people that Michael Bay is a pretty good director. I think people get distracted with his explosions, but I think he knows what he's doing, especially in this kind of film. But anyway, the reason he's in the news today is that Paramount has given him another project. I guess they're busy trying to plan their next move when it comes to Transformers, so he's going to make this in the interim. And it's going to be an adaptation of a story called The Time Salvager. And what it is it tells the story of humans in the future who have gone to the stars. You know, typical, we live in space because we've ruined the Earth. In this story, this science fiction story, they have time travel. But it's dangerous. So who goes? Convicted criminals, right? So they have a convicted criminal go back in time, and they're trying to save the future by changing the past. So this convicted criminal time travels on missions where one of the goals is to complete the mission without triggering a butterfly effect, which sounds pretty cool, right? But then, of course, you know, what's the catalyst for the movie? This convicted criminal saves the scientist who's supposed to die, and then they both become fugitives from the time travel police or whatever. Now, I will bet you that the scientist is some chick, right? I mean, like, you can just see the movie now. I think it would be much more exciting if you switch the gender of the roles, right? If you had a female convicted criminal and a male scientist. I just think that would be interesting, because we've seen this story like so many times before, or variations on it. I'd just like to play with it a little bit. And so I hope that's the case. There were no male or female pronouns associated with the synopsis, so I would love to see them maybe make that change. Because Michael Bay's even made a similar movie to like this, The Island, which, by the way, is very, very good. I've discussed The Island before. They occasionally replay it on television. If they're not replaying it on TV, it's worth digging up. It's a very good movie. Ewan McGregor, Scarlett Johansson, Michael Bay. Really solid film, and it also takes place in the future, but like in the near future that seems somewhat conceivable or relatable. But it's a good movie, and I think if you see that, you would feel very good about Time Salvager. That's a crazy title, though. I would change that title. That's hilarious. It's just so like, you know, like a kid's book, you know, like tumbles out of some kid's backpack. Time Salvager. But it seems very cool. I think it's a good project. It just screams Michael Bay. I think you can do a lot with it. But I would change the title, and I would change the genders of the main characters. So I'm curious. Are you still into Michael Bay movies? Are they a guilty pleasure for you, even if you won't admit it, perhaps? And what do you think of this property for him? And do you think, you know, he can repair his reputation? You know, it's funny we talk about repairing Michael Bay's reputation. Transformers: Age of Extinction was the only movie to make $1 billion last year. His Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a huge hit. They're making a sequel. I mean, the guy's career is on fire. But people continue, perception-wise, to think he's some failure. It's crazy. It's crazy. Michael Bay's exploding his way all the way to the bank. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. No viewer question. The giveaway was in lieu of that, but there will be a viewer question tomorrow. Also, I'll be traveling at the beginning of July, so for the first full week in July, there's going to be all viewer question episodes, because I'm going to do them in advance. So this is a really great time to get in those viewer questions, because I'm going to need like, let's see here, and it's like basically 6 episodes, so that's 18. I need 18 viewer questions to cover that time period. So start asking them now, because I'm going to film them in advance, and I look forward to hearing your questions. So write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, get in those viewer questions, and you can check out some other episodes right now.